if you were a character from a movie or a book, have you ever thought about who you might be most like?
Yeah, I've been kicking that one around since you sent me the script. And I don't know. I guess I'd have to say, I was just thinking about it now, and the best I can come up with, I was looking at the four characters in C.S. Lewis's
Oh, the Pevensey
Narnia
children?
series.
Okay.
And at first I thought I was Susan, the older sister.
Mm-hmm.
But then I thought, no, she seems very sure of herself. She knows what she's doing. She's, at least through the books, that's what the impression you get. I think I'm more like Lucy. I'm not always completely sure about what I'm doing or where I'm going or, what the deal is. So I would say probably Lucy.
That's so fun. At one point, I remember picking apart the four characters and how each character is a response to perhaps imagination or the imaginal realm. You have Peter, who doesn't know if he needs it or not, but has to make it all work. Susan definitely doesn't need it. Edmund doesn't, or maybe it's actually responsibility. I forget now. Edmund doesn't want it, and he wants control or something. And
Right.
Lucy is just purely open to it. And each of these are different. I mean, it's a different way that we approach that sort of thing. Anyhow, we're
Yeah.
going to get into all of this sort of thing. And of course, dragons. It's fun to actually have somebody on who does have dragons in their literature. Welcome, everybody, to Legend Makers. And we're joined by Christina Weigand. Did I pronounce that right? Weigand? There you go. Christina Weigand. And we're going to talk about her journey, her origin story, her latest novel, Sanctuary of Nine Dragons, and anything else that she's got in the pipeline. This show, it's all about interviews, convos, and community news about legend fiction. It's the creative community for Catholic and Orthodox fiction writers talking creed, craft, and co-creation rooted in grit, grace, gods, and actually dragons this time. We're all about inspiring your faith and your fiction. Let's talk about your origin story. How is it that Lucy really begins to feel like deep down that's you, and that maybe that's your approach to who you are? Or what's your origin story, Christina?
Well, I'm basics. I'm the oldest of 8 children.
Oh, likewise.
Funny
What's the division?
story.
How many boys and girls?
There were 7 girls and 1 boy. And
Okay,
my
that'll do it.
brother,
We were all mostly boys on our end. But
yeah, my
anyhow.
brother was number 6 or number 7 of 8. So, and funny story, just a little side note, my husband is also the oldest of 8, and they had 8
Huh.
boys and 1 girl. My mother-in-law loves to share that story. But anyway, so yeah, the oldest of 8. Although I thought for a long time that number 2 sister and I should have switched places because she always seemed the one that was more responsible, more out there going and doing things. She seemed to be my dad's favorite. In fact, we actually did for a time call her sister and mother. Unfortunately, she passed away about 30 years ago. She was
Oh, I'm sorry.
doing things that my father loved. She was in the Air National Guard and she was traveling all over. And I always felt like the sister that stayed home and did all the boring, responsible stuff. I got married, had my first 3 kids, and I started writing when I was probably in middle school, high school, but I didn't really pursue it a whole lot. The first thing I remember was submitting an essay to an American citizen contest or American whatever. It was about America and the flag and patriotism and all that stuff.
Gotcha.
I don't know what happened to it. I know I didn't win. I don't know what happened to it after that. In high school, I wrote for the high school newspaper. I also was with a group of students that we wrote for a local newspaper. After high school, I got married right out of high school. I was only out a year, and my husband and I were married. Another year goes by. I had my oldest son. So writing kind of took a very, very far back seat.
Mm-hmm.
And I've never been one that could really get into journaling. So
Okay.
I didn't do a lot of that. I was raising kids. I had 3 kids. My husband went back to school to get his degree. And I was the soccer mom and
Hmm.
and the computer mom. Volunteered at the kids' schools and did everything. My husband graduated from school, and I decided it was time for me to go back. Still, I didn't consult God or anything. I just thought, oh, interior design sounds like a way to go. So I went back to
Okay.
school, got my degree in interior design, but I didn't feel satisfied.
Okay.
It just didn't do it for me. And there was always, when I would turn a thing in, they said, well, you could have, if you had done this much more, you could have done better, and I never felt like I was getting to that point where I was being successful at it. Got laid off from a job, and I got pregnant with my 4th child. Now, there's 17 years between my 2 daughters. So
Okay.
my youngest daughter, who's 21 and a half years old at this point, was born, and I decided to be a stay-at-home mom again, like I had done before, but I needed something else.
Mm-hmm.
So I took a writing class through the Institute of Children's Literature.
Oh, how cool. Maybe that's one thing that we connected on a while back, because I also did the same thing.
Oh, yeah, it seems to me I've heard that before, but yeah. And the funny thing about that is I found out I had applied twice. The first time I didn't go because the money wasn't right and things weren't right. The second time I went, but I found out that my dad had actually applied. I don't know that he ever went, but my dad had actually applied to go to the Institute of Children's Literature also. But anyway, so I took that class, but that's children's literature, and that's, little kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I always felt like a little kid's story was too short for me. I had too much of a story to tell to fit into a little kid's book.
Mm-hmm.
So I played around with writing for adults, and still that just didn't seem my niche. And then I moved into YA, and I found my home.
Mm-hmm. What was it? I mean, what is it about the YA that just worked for you as opposed to writing for adults? Was it just a level of seriousness or maturity or something, or just a detailed depth? Or
Yeah. Well, first of all, obviously in YA, there's things that you can't put, although anymore it seems like you can put them in there, but it seems like people are doing it. But it just felt like I don't know what exactly the ingredients were, but it just felt like the right place to be for me.
It's like the creative constraints for that genre just clicked and it worked for you.
Right.
Okay.
And then, of course, the fantasy part, science fiction was too technical for me. I'm not a technical person. My husband can, he's an engineer. He can, talk technology but I like to be able to stretch beyond that technology and throw a little magic in, although technology is magic if you think about it, but
yeah. Don't scratch too hard.
Yeah. So then I started writing. And actually, the first book in the novel I started when I was in the Institute for Children's Literature.
Mm-hmm.
And it was, it wasn't the first book I wrote and self-published was called Aaron's Revenge. And it was actually about the boy who shows up later in the trilogy.
Mm-hmm.
But after I wrote that book, the premise was, if a boy wakes up one morning and decides he's discovered that he's not a farm boy, but a wizard and a prince, what's happening to him? So after I wrote that book, I got to thinking, well, wait a minute. How did he get to that point in the first place? How did he get to the point where he wakes up and finds that out? So I wanted to know the backstory. The backstory became the trilogy that we're discussing today.
Oh, wow. So everything has been a preamble up to that first story that you ever wrote.
Right.
or the first novel that she worked on.
Right. So what ended up happening though with that first novel, very interesting, is it actually became an excerpt
Okay.
from Sanctuary of Nine Dragons.
Hmm.
Because by the third book, well, at the end of the second book in the trilogy, the prince is born and all kinds of things happen. And so they are part then of the third book. Their story then becomes part of the third book, intertwined with the story of his parents and his extended relatives, which is what the final book seemed to become.
For those who aren't familiar with your series, and you've got Palace of the 12 Pillars, Palace of the Three Crosses, and then Sanctuary of the Nine Dragons, can you give
Right.
us well, let's start with book one. What's the blurb for book one? And then what does that lead to for this
Okay,
trilogy?
and hold on one second. Let me just. This is the first book,
Mhm.
Palace of the 12 Pillars. The peace summit was in shambles. The prince kidnapped. When a rival king realizes he's kidnapped the wrong prince, hostilities escalate. Loyalties to each other and the country are tested for the twin princes of Credo, Joachim and Brandon. Joachim, captive of King Waldrum, faces deception and betrayal as he struggles to find his way home. Brandon, at home with a father focused on rescuing Joachim, wrestles with his own demons as he searches for his place in the world and the favor of his father. Torn from the safety and peace of their childhood, they are thrust into a world where bonds of family, brotherhood, and role as heirs to Credo are tested. Through war, spiritual journeys, death, and marriage, will they choose the path of good or evil? Who can be trusted as the world they know slips into a whirlpool of chaos? Then the second book, Palace of Three Crosses. Brandon and Joachim have returned from the brink of hell, but everyone questions if they are truly healed and one with Asha. As each prince tries to readjust to life, they must face the funeral of their father and their missing mother. They each take on the responsibility of ruling a country with new wives by their sides. But can they and the country survive the trials that will ensue because of their choices? And then finally, in Sanctuary of Nine Dragons, Joachim banishes Brandon to the prison island of Hyogo. His infant son, Prince Aaron, disappears. That's the kid from the very first novel that I wrote. Prince Aaron disappears from his cradle. A chain of events is set in motion that will pit brother against brother, friend against friend, parents against children, as Brandon and Joachim struggle for control of their sanity and their very lives. With Brandon declared dead and his son missing, Joachim sinks into despair and anger, where those closest to him fear he may never return. Is Brandon really dead? And if he is, who is manipulating the Mantian and the enemies of Credo? Can Maeve save her country and her husband from the technicals of evil pervading the land?
My goodness. What's the overall feel and the vibe of the world? Is it similar to anything people are already familiar with? Where
Um,
did you go with it?
I was kind of in the medieval world.
Mhm.
I kind of patterned it after Ireland and Germany. I wanted to get away from the typical English.
Mhm.
And also, there's a little bit of Japanese that comes in the third book. So the names are very, the names I chose for the characters are very based on those countries and what was going on and their
Mhm.
personalities. So it's kind of how I come up with the names. I choose their nationality and then a particular role that they're supposed to represent in the book.
Mhm.
So like Joachim was the father of Mary in the Bible. Well, he's the
Okay.
father of kind of the father of the chosen one. Although at the end of the book, you find out there's actually like three chosen ones. But so
Well,
it's
there you
just
go.
three.
Because why not? Yeah. So what's the okay? So you started painting a world here that's like you said, it's a fusion of German and Irish world building, and it's is it sort of how do I say? Is it like fantasy overlaid over a historical realism sort of thing, or is it's definitely a fantasy world but inspired by these countries? How much world building did you go into?
With these books, I didn't do a lot. Surprisingly, I know everybody talks about world building and character building. I'm a pantser, so when I write my story, it just comes out of me, and whatever comes
Nice.
out comes out. I will go back and check on something. Like at one point, somebody said to me, "Oh, that ceramic cups weren't in the medieval times." So I had to go back and kind of check and see. Okay, because I tried to stick, close to our real world experiences, but it's obviously a
Mhm.
totally different world.
Yeah.
Um, so I don't know to answer your question. And
No, that's cool. Okay, so more of a pantser. So you're just how does that then work for you? Then what's the process? You like fix on you have identify a couple of characters that you need to follow. You know where the adventure kind of needs to end up, and then you just write towards it and see where it goes.
um, yeah, basically, my characters tend to evolve as I write. So at the beginning of the story, I couldn't tell you much. I mean, I knew the basics. You fill out those character questionnaires that say what color hair, what color eyes,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
all
Uh-huh.
that stuff. But I didn't really get into their personalities a
Hmm.
whole lot. And the things that, when I first wrote this, I mean, I'd had writing classes, but I hadn't. The more you learn, the more, and the more you can put into it. Books
Hmm.
I'm writing now have a lot more going into them than those 3 books had.
Hmm.
But so the characters themselves would evolve throughout the story, and the same with the setting. And so that's kind of my process. I mean, I had got the idea. Like I said, the original idea was, okay, what happens if a prince wakes up, or a boy wakes up one morning, a farm boy wakes up and he's a prince and he's a wizard. And
Hmm.
the first actual book that became an excerpt later, that was what the story was about. And then what happened was I wanted to know more. So I went
Hmm.
back and I said, okay, who are his parents? Who are his uncle? What's the story? And some of that I had gotten from the little excerpt, but then I had to expand on it.
How do you think you've grown as a writer? What's something that you now know or now feels obvious to you that back when you started wasn't?
uh, like the whole process. I mean, like for this book I'm currently working on, sorry about that. Um, the current book I'm working on is kind of, I'm doing a lot more research,
Hmm.
because it is actually set in America and Scotland in 1846. So I'm having to do a
Oh,
lot. Well, it's set there, but it's an alternate world because of the
mhm.
dragons, of course. But
Right.
um, now I'm still a pantser. I cannot nail myself
Hmm.
down to an outline. There's just no way. In fact, in
Right.
the second book of that series, of my series, um,
Hmm.
I had an outline. I was doing it during Nano in November, and
Oh,
I thought,
really?
okay, I have the first book written. I know what happens. I have the third book written. I know how things have to end. All I have to do is fill in the middle, right? Well, I got about a week into Nano, and my characters shut up. They wouldn't tell me anything. They wouldn't talk to me. They absolutely refused until I threw out the outline. so,
Huh.
um, so
Why
yeah,
do
I
you think
can't.
that was? What? How did you
They
deal
did.
with that?
I threw out the outline to start with, and then I just went back to pantsing it and writing.
Hmm.
Now I do a little bit more. I mean, I have an idea what's going to happen in the beginning of the book,
Hmm.
where I some ideas for the middle, some ideas for the end,
Hmm.
but I still leave myself open enough that I can keep my characters talking to me.
Yeah. It's so intriguing how that works for authors. I think other people who might not be authors just scratch their heads and just wonder, what are you talking about? Characters actually talking to you. But it's true that they feel like they take on a life of their own, and you write them into corners, and all of a sudden they come up with something that surprises you. And why do you think that is? Like, what's going on with that, like inside the soul of a writer, where that kind of thing can happen?
It's hard to say. I mean, and maybe it's kind of like our relationship with God too. We get ideas, we think things should go this way, and we move on them. But God says, "Hey, wait a minute, that's not what I had in mind." So it's I think it's kind of the same thing. The characters are telling me, "Hey, this isn't the." I'll give you a little spoiler. In the third book, the one king, who's the uncle and the bad guy, he actually ends up sacrificing himself and dying at the end of the book.
Oh.
It took me 3 times trying to kill him before he'd let me kill him.
Okay.
He didn't like the way I was doing it, so.
Well, you heard it here first, folks. Oh, that's crazy.
But yeah, I think that's kind of what it is. Our characters take on a life of their own, and you have to do things their way. It's kind of a give and take a little bit.
Yeah. Well, there's an inner consistency that I think when a character is well formed, they do take on their own life. They have their own set of laws and an inner consistency. And for example, as we were watching Moon Knight, right? And that's all about dramatization, but quite accurately, I'm told, how split personalities work. Have you seen that series?
Yeah,
on
I
Disney?
watched it. I thought it was rather interesting.
Yeah. So, and I think that's what authors are doing with characters, is we're creating, I mean, effectively little sub personalities, because they're all inside us.
Yeah.
But they very clearly want their own things when we construct them well. And you can always tell when a character is not constructed very well, because they do whatever they're told, and you can just make them do whatever you want. It's like, well, as opposed to fighting back with you and finding yourself stuck because you want the story to go one way and the characters they want to go hard left and do something different. So you'd mentioned dragons, and we were chatting very briefly about that before. I was curious to ask you again, what do you think most people get wrong about dragons? And then you've incorporated them. So what's the word?
Well, first of all, people tend to think of them as evil. And I don't believe God would have created creatures to be evil. He creates us to be good. And so that's probably the biggest thing I had, and that, I mean, my dragons are, what's the word I'm looking for? They interact with people. They talk to people. They are sentient. That's the word I was looking for. They're sentient beings. And, a lot of people, when they think of dragons, think of big beasts.
Yeah.
That, burn things down. The other interesting thing I discovered, I've done some research, and different colored dragons have different breath powers. Not all of them can breathe fire. Some breathe acid, some breathe ice. So depending on the color. And one of the things I've had to do is there is not really a purple dragon in, all the research I've done. You don't find purple dragons, but I figured, okay, so I've got a purple dragon. There are blue dragons and there are red dragons. So I had a blue and a red dragon made to come up with my purple dragon. So now she has the powers of both the red dragon and the purple dragon.
Yeah, intriguing. You use the word sentient, and I'm curious, how do you define that as opposed to intelligent? Because I always thought animals would be sentient, but people would be intelligent. So a dragon that could communicate would be an intelligent dragon.
Okay, well, maybe that's what I meant. It's just that they interact more with people. I mean, in that series of books that I wrote, they were kind of representative as messengers from the god in that series. And they were there to guide the princes and then later kings, and help them get through things and keep them on the straight and narrow. And the current book I'm working on, and you and I've talked about this a little bit, the one I'm revising, not my newest one, but the one I'm revising, the
Mhm.
dragons are actually there to spread the word of God, to protect the people spreading the word of God, and and to help those people spread the word of God.
Mhm.
So their mission is on Earth is to, and another little fun fact is that the same dragons that are in the trilogy, now they've come to Earth.
Okay.
But
That's cool.
they have been, God has sent them to Earth to establish a group of people called Dragon Guardians
Mhm.
that are there to spread and protect the word of God.
Mhm.
And it's going to be a mixture of dragons and people.
Mhm.
So,
That sounds fun. I mean, I'm just seeing like Ite Misa est Dracaris.
yeah.
When when you were growing up, did you have a favorite legend or a story that you would reread over and over again, or maybe has some special meaning for you now that you're older?
I can't think of any off the top of my head. I mean, like, I've told the story before. I read Marguerite Henry books, and she was all about horses. She wrote um, Misty of Chincoteague,
Okay.
and um, I was all about her books. And
Mhm.
it was because I loved horses. And I always thought, oh, it'd be so cool to have a horse. Then when I had a horse, it wasn't so cool. But um, that's one that the one, the one I think of the most. I don't know. I mean, because I didn't read, well, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. Um, I read that when I was younger, and then I reread it with my granddaughter. The whole Narnia series I reread with my
Wow.
granddaughter several years ago.
Mhm.
Um, Tolkien, I didn't read until I was an adult.
Mhm.
So, um, so yeah, probably C.S. Lewis or Marguerite Henry would be my childhood ones, and then Tolkien
Mhm.
as I got older.
I'm curious if your experience of having a horse and then actually learning to live with it and take care of it, did that provide any inspiration for writing about dragons and big beasts and taking care of them?
It might have, because when I even think about it, like my favorite animal is a white-tailed deer, just because they're
Oh.
so graceful,
Mhm.
um, and giraffes. I remember loving giraffes when I was a kid.
Mhm.
So I think they fed into, my dragon
Yeah,
thing.
these.
Although
Yeah.
that is something too that didn't develop until later in life.
Mhm. Ah, that is intriguing. Um, is there a name yet for this new book that you're working on?
The new
Are
one
you
that I'm
floating
working
anything
on,
yet?
right now, tentative title is Scottish Legacy.
Okay.
Um, that's just the tentative title because I don't know. I haven't figured out how the dragon's getting involved yet. I haven't figured out how
Gotcha.
well, I got the unicorn involved. I just haven't figured out the dragon yet.
So, what's your writing process like? Is it a fixed time, scheduled time? Do you write in bursts? What? How do you? Is this your writing environment for those who are watching on YouTube? Um, how do you write your works, your novels?
Unfortunately, I don't have. Well, maybe not unfortunately, because I've written, several books and had them published. So
Hmm.
I don't have a set schedule, although I keep trying to set one.
Hmm.
And in fact, with this book, my current project, The Scottish Legacy, I'm actually trying to set up a schedule because now I have a lot more going on in my life than, although it seemed like I should have less going on now that all my kids are grown and gone. But um, just, I just would like to, what I'm trying to do is say, okay, from 1 to 2 every afternoon, I'm
Hmm.
going to sit down and write. And
Hmm.
it kind of works in my schedule. I participate in a group called Shut Up and Write.
Hmm. Okay.
And they do write-ins, online write-ins. So I've gone in and scheduled every day of the week, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Saturday, I do the one at Legend Makers.
Okay.
Sunday, I take the day off. But yeah, I just have been trying to, set myself up a schedule where I know that's when I'm going to write.
Mm-hmm.
The last 2 weeks, not this week, but the last 2 weeks, I actually participated in a 10,000 word in 10 days challenge.
Wow, that sounds rough. How'd it go?
I was successful. I actually got like 12,000 words, and it was all
Wow.
handwritten too. It wasn't typed, which
Oh
I
my
think is
goodness.
a trick.
Okay.
And I will spout it off because I think it works. Handwriting for me anyway, and for a lot of other people, stimulates the muse. Whereas and there's been studies about it. I haven't actually seen the studies, but the woman who was running the challenge last week said that there have been studies that show when you're handwriting something, it stimulates more than when you're trying to type it.
How interesting. Do you have any sense of why that you can maybe share?
I don't know. It's just
remember?
once I sit down with a pen and a piece of paper and start writing, it just seems to flow.
Wow.
I don't know where, although I've had it happen when I'm typing too, especially like during November when I'm doing nano. Sometimes it's a lot easier to type 50,000 words than it is to write 50,000.
Yeah, no kidding.
But it really, I think it does. I feel more of a flow, more in the zone when I'm handwriting than when I'm typing. And when you're typing on the computer, I mean, probably when you were typing with just a typewriter and a piece of paper in your own little corner of the world, it probably worked, for getting in the zone. But with the computer, we have so many distractions, and the phones and this, and I can't, I don't want to turn off my phone in case there's an emergency call or something. I have family that lives on the West Coast. They can only call me in the afternoon, So I think there's too many distractions. That's the biggest thing when it comes to writing on the computer, is you just get too many distractions.
Do you have a deadline for the new novel?
I'm working on setting that one up.
Okay.
Part of what happened when I took this 10,000 word challenge is this woman who runs the challenge also runs what she calls the book incubator, where she accepts so many students and helps them set up everything. And of course, there's a little bit of a hefty fee for it. So at the end of the 2 weeks, the 10 days, whatever, I actually signed up just to see if I could even get in, because I wasn't sure that I could get in. Well, they accepted me. Now I have to figure out a way to tell them I can't afford to do.
Oh, okay.
I have a phone call with her next week, but part of their process is setting up that
the commitment and the schedule.
Setting up some kind of schedule. I'd like to say that, maybe by the end of the year I could have the first draft finished.
Wow.
I don't know, because it's taken me a lot of years to write the other stuff I've written. So, but if I'm dedicated to it,
each comes in its own time. That's exciting that you've got the new one. Well, it's where can people find you online if they want to check out your novels? Or I think you've got a sample story available on your website that people can check out.
Yeah, and I do have the 2 websites. One specifically with the dragons on it is for young adult, and I do book reviews. That is WeigandChris.com.
WeigandChris.com.
Chris.com. I have another website. I'm looking to eventually merge them, but I haven't quite figured that one out yet. And that one is Christina Weigand, Christina Weigand .com. And that's for adult books, and which I kind of suspect the Scottish Legacy is kind of going to nudge itself up into the
more of a mature storyline.
Maybe new adult.
Nice. Well, good. I'll put those in the show notes. People can check you out there, and that's the best place to check out your trilogy. Is Those.
Yeah, I need to go in and probably do some adjustments because it's no longer through the publisher. All the books are on Amazon.
We'll put that in the show notes as well.
Yeah.
Well, in a second, I'll ask you your 1 minute message of encouragement. I want to let people know that this show is brought to you by LegendFiction.com. It's a creative community for modern Catholic and Orthodox fiction writers. It's all about sharing your works in progress, giving and getting feedback, and doubling, maybe even tripling your writing output because it's so much fun. And that's from the members. That's not me saying that. Join our private community at LegendFiction.com. Christina, if you had 1 minute to share a message of encouragement to faith-inspired authors, what would you want to say?
Just one quick note on what you just said, though. I agree 100%. I joined the writing groups on Saturday, and I just felt so at home.
Oh, that's great.
I felt like they were my people. As far as inspiration, the one thing I always say, and this applies, you don't even have to be a Christian writer or a Catholic writer, but if you're driven to do it, if that is your passion, don't let somebody tell you not to do it. Stay with it. And especially as Catholic writers too, I think, I was having a discussion with my daughter the other day about my books, and on the back of the book it actually says YA Christian fantasy, and she said nobody's going to buy them because it says Christian fantasy. And so she was trying to tell me to get rid of my dragons and get rid of the word Christian and all that, but that's me, and I can't get rid of it. So if it's you, don't give it up.